It's not a media story. It's much, much more than that. There are two other names you need to be aware of for context. Paul Dacre, the former editor of the Daily Mail, now editor-in-chief of Associated Newspapers, and Charles Moore, the former editor of the Daily Telegraph and the Spectator magazine, now a baron, thanks to the patronage of his former protégé, Boris Johnson, because Boris Johnson wanted to put Charles Moore in charge of the BBC. He wanted to put Paul Dacre in charge of Ofcom, and he ended up putting Richard Sharp in charge of the former. These are people who look at the media landscape in the United Kingdom and see a rough 90% support for their own politics, their own party, their own people, their own Brexit. They look at that. They look at the 90% support that they enjoy, and they don't think it's enough. So they want to take the actual areas of independence and impartiality, like the BBC or Channel 4, and they want to remould them in their own right-wing image. And then the tiny corners of commercial media, because Ofcom is the overseer, the watchdog for commercial media, i.e., here, LBC, the tiny, tiny corners of commercial media that provide you with the detail and the facts that you need to make informed decisions instead of filling you with nonsense about trades unions, immigrants, people in small boats, refugees, the European Union. I could go on, I frequently do. The tiny, tiny little corners of commercial media where you are in with a decent chance of getting the truth. Boris Johnson and his mates wanted to put the former editor of the Daily Mail in charge of that. So that's a power grab. That's a cultural coup. That's disgusting, and it's been going on under your nose in plain sight. Let's hear from the latest victim of the coup's current failure.
I feel that this matter may well be a distraction from the corporation's good work were I to remain in post until the end of my term. I have, therefore, this morning, resigned as the BBC chair to the Secretary of State and to the board. It was proposed to me that I stay on as chair until the end of June, while the process to appoint my successor is undertaken, and I will, of course, do that in the interests of the corporation's stability and continuity.
Thank you. Richard Sharp becoming the latest man whose entire life has been polluted by proximity to Boris Johnson, following down that ugly, ugly path. People like Owen Paterson, Dominic Raab, I suppose, ultimately, and countless others. Priti Patel, although she, of course, didn't have to walk the plank, having been found by an independent inquiry to have been a proven bully. Dominic Raab, found by an independent inquiry to be a proven bully, only had to walk the plank because he was so arrogant and ignorant that he promised he wouldn't not walk the plank. He would walk the plank in the event of being found to be a proven bully. I'm just going to mention once more that my information, such as it is, was that he was not a bad chairman. I don't know where some of the decisions that have been taken with regard to, for example, Laura Kuenssberg on a Sunday morning having the editor of The Sun sitting in front of her in the middle of the Jeremy Clarkson scandal and not asking her a single question about the Jeremy Clarkson scandal. You remember the one where he said that he wanted to personally throw excrement at the King's daughter-in-law. That's perfectly normal behaviour. Shortly after, he'd had lunch with the King's wife, it emerged, a little later in the day. So plenty there to get your teeth into, but she chose not to. You know that Robbie Gibb, who is a fully paid up member of the Brexit battalion, you know that he has publicly and privately sought to frustrate the appointment of people, brilliant journalists, to senior positions because he objected to things they'd written on Twitter or jobs they had done outside the BBC. I don't know where Richard Sharp stood on that sort of thing, but I do know this. He is another man whose proximity to Boris Johnson has cast a long and permanent shadow over his life. The mention there of public service is fair. You know, if you make a ton of money, it's a little bit medieval for my money. I got to be honest with you. I'm kind of with Aneurin Bevan on this one. Just pay more tax. But a lot of people who are ended up richer than Croesus do decide to sort of salve their consciences or their innate sense of the utter inequality that's delivered the kind of wealth they enjoy by going to work for charities or by doing good works. It's a bit why Victorian entrepreneurs opened children's homes. It's at workhouses and built, sanitariums for their crippled workforce. So I get that. But my goodness me, today's conversation could be about so many different things. Are you bored of Boris Johnson? This is still his legacy. Everything he touched turned to, I can't say that word on the radio, but whatever the opposite of the Midas touch is, every single thing he touches including, of course, our country, but many people are still not ready to recognise that. And crucially, this attempt, this power grab, this absolutely blatant and transparent attempt to sell Channel 4, to populate the BBC with their own people, to put their own people in charge of commercial broadcasting organisations, everything from little old me right through to the Capital Breakfast Show. And also, of course, to put their own people in charge of the BBC. And when the first one failed, up popped this fella who'd already seen his attempts to get onto the board come to absolutely nothing during what you have to presume was a more independent appointment process. It's coming up to 10:15. We'll speak shortly to the chap who broke this story and the the lingering problem that we have with the question of who actually guaranteed Boris Johnson's loan. That's an £800,000 loan arrangement at a time when 30p Lee was accusing nurses of not being able to manage their finances effectively and lying when they said that they needed to use food banks. That's modern Britain. It's one of those moments, isn't it? One of those moments where you really notice where we are. You've got a deputy chairman of the Conservative Party, a man who, frankly, to call him as thick as mince would be a grave disservice to the versatility and deliciousness of mince. He will accuse nurses of lying, really, about the necessity of using food banks because they're really just victims of their own poor financial management, while bending the knee and licking whipped cream out of the navel of a man who needed an £800,000 loan arrangement simply to keep his various ships afloat while enjoying a prime ministerial salary in excess of £140,000. That's Brexit Britain. That's Boris Johnson. I'm going to open up the phone lines. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. It's a weird one, this. It's a huge story. It's a very big deal. It is, however, not an obvious phone-in subject. So I'm going to do something I don't do very often, and I'm just going to ask you to do what I've just done and tell me what this tells you about who we are and where we are, and possibly even where we're going. 0345 6060 973. I could go with the fecal touch, but it's not a phrase that I'm going to deploy frequently in the course of this morning's programme. I, as ever, at the moment, in this weird little interregnum, I would love to hear from people who were, or even perhaps still are, Boris Johnson fans. There'll be plenty of it in tomorrow's newspapers, but you can't hire someone, you can't put someone in a massive job who's just helped you secure an £800,000 loan that nobody knows about. It's so bloody obvious. I can't believe it needs to be said out loud. I feel a little bit sorry for Richard Sharp. I don't think he was necessarily dodgy. Whether or not he would have got the job in the absence of already being a crony of Boris Johnson and indeed a loan facilitator of Boris Johnson, I do not know. But my goodness me, the way that man thought he could do whatever the heck he wanted in direct contravention of tradition, regulation, expectation and basic common decency doesn't just harm us, it harms the people closest to him. It harms the people that he offers patronage to. It damages reputations. It undermines good works, histories, CVs. And now he's gone. Another one. Another Boris Johnson appointment. Departing from the public stage in disgrace. What do you make of it all? Particularly ex-BBC people, even current BBC people, although you may have to use a false name. I sometimes wish I could show you my DMs from people who are still in the corporation if you want to know where bodies are buried and where feelings lie. But my goodness me. A man who has essentially got one of the most powerful jobs in British media in the gift of a busted flush of a Prime Minister, having helped said busted flush secure an £800,000 loan facility. This is the kind of stuff that is supposed to happen in banana republics. It's the kind of stuff that is supposed to happen in Soviet Russia. It's the kind of stuff that is supposed to happen in broken democracies. And yet it's happened here so incrementally, so slowly, so much in stages. I suspect a lot of people listening to this now don't realise what a significant story this is.